Today, we're going to be going over sort of an expanded version of what is the relationship between our standards and actual properties. And so the question that we get quite a lot is, how do these projects not all end up looking the same? That you have these standard home types, and how does it not end up being sort of a generic house rather than my house and my unique location? And today we're going to answer that looking through the lens of a specific project and a specific client who has specific tastes. And so our standards always kind of floating in space a little bit until they sort of hit the reality of a project's location, the landscape that they're going to fit in. So they hit the reality of the legal conditions, the building code and zoning and requirements of that location. And then maybe most importantly to this conversation, they hit the reality of the tastes, aesthetics, and kind of design disposition of our clients. And today we're going to show how that standard as a starting point evolves and becomes unique once it gets seen through the lens of and interpreted through the lens of our clients. So Joe, do you have shared?
Yep, I do. I can open it up here.
Cool. So as Wayne started to intro, what we'll be talking about today is a bit of our interiors process and really how we make it your own. So you may have joined previous webinars in the past and got a little bit of a download about how we work through interiors here at Huts. We have like a standard process that I'll walk you through a little bit, but from time to time, really more often than not, we also have clients coming to us that have a unique take on interiors that really suits their personalities, their aesthetic, the types of spaces they want to live in. And today we're going to go through a live example of how that's working on a current project and how we really bring in a more custom interiors approach from a Hut standards, but still fold that into our process to make sure we have a good project in the end. So 3 parts to this webinar. The first is a brief overview on the Hut's process for interiors, then talking about a specific project, Stonewall House, and finally time for a Q&A at the end. All right. So in the Hut's fixture and finish selection process, or our interiors process, is really 5 key steps. The first, we start about talking about general interior and aesthetic mood to your space, kind of based upon some pre-selected things that we know look great and work really well together. Going from that, we establish sort of like what all the items are in the house. We take a tabulation, make an accounting, do things called takeoffs, where we're calculating number of hardware fixtures, the square footage of your floor, to put together the first pass at a complete interiors package and tabulation and budget of all the items that will eventually go into your project. Then we review that budget with you. We go through sort of a final selection process once we have the construction drawings complete and we're coordinating actively with a contractor on anything that's going to be necessary to know about interiors that's affecting construction. And finally, Huts will work with you and with the contractor to put orders in through our manufacturers and our owners reps to get those things selected and sent out to site. And utilizing the trade discounts, we're able to secure sort of on your behalf. So this is, an image you may see on Instagram or some presentations that we give. Huts has a very, I would say, sort of refined aesthetic and simple aesthetic. But even something like this is very complex from an interior point of view. There's hundreds and hundreds of decisions that need to be made within the interiors process. So even just looking at this one simple image of this kitchen, this represents hundreds of decisions that need to make between paint color. How do we coordinate with a cabinetry manufacturer or mill worker? Coordinate with plumbers, electricians, the construction detailing with the general contractor, finishes, operation of fixtures, all kinds of things. And our process is really set up to streamline this process, have you be feeling information overload through this process, and like Wayne likes to say, avoid any fights that may be happening between you and your significant other, because this can be a very trying process if you're just kind of thrown into the deep end with the thousands and thousands of items that are potentially out there. So Hut starts off with, as I said, first, before establishing with you sort of like where do you land sort of on a light and airy or dark and rich type of mood gradient. Some people are all one side, some are the other, some are loaded in between. To start to get to the first selection of things that form the common foundations of flooring and light fixtures, the kitchen aesthetic, the bathroom aesthetic that you're really looking for. And as we'll talk to later, we can deviate from this as well within the structure. That gets us into selecting actual items for your. This is an example of kitchen, sort of things that are a standard interior package, the ones that are an upgraded interior package that are to really work with your budget within the selection process as well, and work with you through some palette options that we have as a part of these fixtures and finishes as well. And that gets us into everything we're recommending, everything we have is a part of the Huts Interiors catalog. We've pre-vetted all of these items. We have trade relationships with all of these manufacturers to get the best pricing that you can get on this. And we're working with you through here and pulling items from here to create your entire interior package as a part of this process. So that's just a very brief overview of like how we help to guide you through a typical process. Do you have any questions on that? Wayne, anything you think we want to talk about a little bit more here before we dive into?
We have a webinar specifically about this piece of it. How do we go through each of these steps and kind of expand on them quite a bit? So we'll definitely put the link to that down in the description below. But I think it's important for anyone out there who has maybe done a renovation or updated something in their house, or even just gone into a tile showroom at any point, is like Joe said, there are thousands of options for things and probably a few hundred decisions that need to be made, and you get into that decision fatigue. And so one of the things that we want to do in interior selections, and similarly like with all of our processes, have asked fewer questions to get more information to make bigger decisions more quickly and overall kind of streamline things. And so through that light and airy, darker rich, upgraded, downgraded, is it a rental, is it your primary home, we're able to get to something like you see here where we have selections on everything. And usually people say, hey, I love 75% of this, but I've got some particular ideas on cabinet pulls, or I have a particular idea on the guest bathroom. Can we talk about that? So rather than having a superficial conversation or an endless conversation about thousands of decisions, we end up having a deep conversation around a few decisions that really matter to you in the finishes and fixtures of your home.
All right. Now we can move on to Stonewall House here. That sounds good.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue into, these are folks that had a few really particular ideas, and how did we account for that?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we'll see if Katie's able to join here, and she'll be able to provide a little bit more information than I can. But these are Katie McBride, who's one of our project managers. These are her clients, Danielle and Brett, and they're an example of a client that came to us with a pretty clear take and a really awesome vision for what they wanted the interior of their project to feel like. So this was a mood board that they sent to us early on in the process. Katie's talked about this, but they really referenced some of Wes Anderson type of color aesthetic. They have some pretty unique collections of items, like in the lower left, this vintage lunchbox, or lower right, this vintage lunchbox collection that wanted to be prominent and on display in the house. These are sort of all inputs that Katie was working with us through when she was thinking about working with them through the interiors about how do we, bring these really bold sort of color block type of elements, these allowing for these items to be on display into the process that may not have been things that are sort of a part of the standard options that we have here at us.
Yeah, and I would add here, you can see a lot of kind of bold palette, but there's also real stuff that this is particularly the case for Brett and Danielle, where this is going to be their primary home, and they're coming with all of the stuff that they've accumulated and collected for their relationship together and the time that they've been alive. And all of that has to find a spot in this new house, which, when you're sort of rendering something or thinking about it as a universal standard, you're assuming there's some amount of stuff, but it's the stuff and the objects and making sure that you're designing to the things that are special to our clients that starts to manipulate that standard. And so one of the first things that we picked up on was, there's this lunchbox example. Is that like just a fun, quirky thing? Or do you actually have a lunchbox collection? And they said, we really have that. Where's it going to go? And so that becomes part of our determination, and in not just in skinning the design, but also looking at storage and other sort of architectural interventions.
So then what Katie did is she took this input, this mood board, like these examples of things that Brett and Danielle had, and she started to identify, okay, what are the spaces in the house that we're designing? Where are sort of these key moments, these key design moments where these things are going to start to express themselves within the project? So Now there's a working artist studio. That's a part. We've modified our standard. That's a part of this project. That's a pretty cool spot, a key area, a small office area, more generous closet for clothing. Because again, this could be their primary home. It's not sort of a rental unit or a secondary home that some of our clients may have. So they have more things they need to store. Then maybe finding some more found opportunities. So how are there clever built-ins that are a place to display objects or to hide things? How do we work with things like the media wall with the fireplace and the TV to make some of these elements more discrete and to have them have more of an impact in the space as well? So taking standard spaces that are within a HUD's project and tweaking them, editing them, adding some more design thought and intention to them to really tailor them to this project.
And on number 6, you mentioned the media wall with the discrete TV. That's this example again of the standard not just hitting the aesthetic of the client, but also the difference in, while it's one house, there's many people living in it or multiple people living in it. And so there's really 2 clients. And so in this case, one side of the client partnership plays a lot of video games. The TV is out and about. It's kind of part of the experience. The other one hates having the TV shown during in the living room. And so how do we make sure that we're accounting for that? That's a condition and a requirement that pushes our standard to become unique. And it's not just treating our clients as sort of one idea, but many times it's a family, it's a couple, it's multi-generational. We're taking each of those opinions into account and figuring out how that they can be facilitated through this customization process.
Yeah, so we work with them to select the medium bar, sort of between the medium bar and the big bar as a standard to work with, kind of based both on budget and space requirements, how they wanted to operate this space, and went through that modification process to bring those more unique elements of the space that are really important to how they want to live. So, in both of these options, well, more so on the left, we're showing how we can take a medium bar and do a little bit more customization to it to create all these spaces they want within a smaller footprint, less cost. And then taking something like the big bar, that's a larger project that maybe intuitively you think, oh, I need more square footage to get more of these type of spaces that I want, an artist studio, a built-in dining nook. But our designers and here, that's like we believe very strongly that, there's room for modification. There's room to design these standards to your way of living, where you don't necessarily need an extra 600 square feet just to get some spaces that you want. That can really be designed in a really intuitive and beautiful way, sort of within a smaller footprint. And that's what we worked with Brett and Danielle on to make sure that we can fit their budget sort of with the project, with the medium bar as the starting point. So we went through a bit of like an evaluation with them as well, like which standard works best for your site, what's better for cost, what offers sort of better conditions for you, and this is an image of that project, of that modified project that kind of landed a little bit between a big bar and between a medium bar. Also went through, and we do this on all of our projects. We offer cost estimating really from the very beginning at site planning, to set our budgets for the project. So we know what we're trying to hit for the cost of groundwork. We know what we're trying to hit for the cost of building the shell of the project. But that also establishes a budget range for interiors, fixtures, and finishes. And you'll see here that about, somewhere around 20% of the total project cost is going to be our budget for fixtures and finishes. So that's a very important marker for us, especially when we're working with clients that have some more unique things that they want us to bring into the project that we don't necessarily know the prices of up front, and to make sure that we have a check, that we're not just bringing in tens and tens of thousands of dollars of unique things, but maybe we're investigating other manufacturers or other types of finishes that have a lower cost point that can allow us to do a lot more on budget to really get you what you want.
Like Joe said, the major tool that we are going to have to be able to work with the client after we determine the standard and we know the square footage, there's not much we're going to be able to change overall in pricing. Like concrete costs can be concrete cost, the lumber costs can be the lumber costs, insulation is going to be more or less there. These are sort of commodified prices. And so getting to that point where we say, all right, we know this is your budget, we absolutely want to make sure that we're not designing something that can't be built or isn't feasible for you. It's one of our main value propositions at HUDs. And then we say, this really is the allowance. This is what we have to spend for all of the things we're going to do, whether it's very standard for us, whether it's upgraded elements, whether it's custom things like lunchbox storage walls. How do we make sure that all of that is sort of accounted for within this budget range for those finish and fixtures allowances? And that allows us to do some really clever things because we have everything itemized of what is our upgraded and standard and value pricing for pieces. We can start to say, well, we know that the dining room nook and we know that the lunchbox storage is key and a requirement, and that has to be there on the pricing. Maybe that means we're coming down market in some other selections. And we can kind of play with those dials a little bit and say, these are really important, high priority. Great. Let's make sure that we account for those. The ramification of that is we need to come down market on this other thing to make sure that that finish allowance still holds up. And while there can be a moment of discussion there with our clients where it feels like we're policing some of what they're going to get, it's also guaranteeing that the house actually happens. And that's a number one kind of consideration for us. The most important things, the most unique things to them get into the project, and other places that could be upgraded later or maybe are less important, we use them as levers to come down in cost and make sure that all of the budget sort of balances out here.
So when we're going through the interiors process, again, this is Stonewall house. This is a view of the great room sort of early on in that design process. We're really walking you through a white box type of view to keep the focus on spaces, organization of elements before we get into more of the color, the grain, the exact selection of fixtures and finishes. So this is after the first round of modifications that Katie worked on with Brett and Danielle, and you'll start to see here elements of the great room and this TV wall that we were talking about, of how this starts to become more of an object and a storage area within the space, has a central focus. It's also serving as a railing to the studio above, and creates this pretty cool entry condition with some coat and shoe storage around the corner. So we're working in the model in 3D space, doing live walkthroughs with you to look at all these elements and see the impact sort of some of the spaces that you want to see in a live wave. So we can vet, yeah, this is looking really cool, and maybe I want to tweak a couple of things here. And then this is that final version of that same exact space in the project. So you see, we sort of started here. And some of the design feedback that we received back from the client is like, as we were saying before, the TV is still kind of hanging out in the space. Is there a way we can be more clever about allowing it to be hidden? This shelf isn't totally accessible at all times. How do we make that more useful, or sort of allow for even more objects than what's being shown here? And this is that final result. This starts to become a pretty cool object in the room itself, where we're combining both the fireplace, the TV storage here behind these panels that swing open, doing a bit more of a refined shelving unit that also allows for a lot more storage. But then you start to see these kind of cool glimpses of this wallpaper and this patterning that's happening on the project in some pretty cool areas. So again, kind of working all the way back to the client's mood board, where they're sending us, images of this more intensely colored type of space. How are we doing that in some really cost effective and cool moments? Painting the stairs a cool color. That doesn't cost anything, but that's a really cool sort of vibe to the space. Same example here, sort of looking back towards the kitchen. This is, again, one of the first design images that Katie was working with, and the final result of what that kitchen is. Kind of, taking a similar approach to the wallpaper. How do we find a cool patterned tile that really adds a lot of design interest to the space? And how do we start thinking about that space looks like when there's objects on the wall? Thinking about the entire space, not just the the finishes or the color of things, but how do we design the entire space with some cool objects that the client has as well? And again, same idea here, sort of in the studio and the guest room. And this is very, very simple space, and it's really been more of a furniture solution than a built-in millwork solution. So that was sort of a key thing that came up in that pricing and that trade-off exercise that Wayne was talking about. Where in some of these, like the fireplace wall, like there's a dedicated line item in the budget that's going in here to do some custom cabinetry and millwork for the shelving and the TV, some cool tile on this fireplace wall. And as a result of that, maybe what could have been like built-in desks, custom built-in desks by a mill worker, now just becomes a simple space where the client is going to be furnishing this themselves to put the money where it's really needed, and maybe do this later down the line. Sort of that idea of cool built-in custom desks that is still important to them. Just an image of the bathroom. Katie worked with it to sort of find alternate tile ideas both for the wall and for the flooring, and having a very different take in the primary bathroom, which is here, than the guest bathroom, which is here, but still working with the same color element. So like a really dark, vanity and hardware, a sort of color in the tile and the wall and the floor, but then taking the master, still keep making it very black and really allowing that terrazzo to pop here on the shower and the tub. Any other comments on those things, Wayne? I was just kind of descriptive about.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that what ties all of these together is that these are our clients' images, not Hut's images in a lot of ways, right? I'm sure anyone who's here and watching this webinar, you have watched other webinars, you've been following along with Hut's, you have a sense that we have like a very particular aesthetic, and it's coming from us. A lot of people say, I want exactly the way that you visualize your projects. Other people say, I love the form, I love the process, I love the methodology, but I've got a different take on aesthetic execution. And I think it's a really nice thing to see that there's this kind of handoff between our spaces and the way that we show them and how they become this client spaces and how they think about their lifestyle. And that we are in no way being ruthless around kind of applying our aesthetic perspective fully to the client, that, like the name of this entire webinar, it's become their own. This is their space. This is a spot that's a reflection of their perspective and their choices, but without it getting out of control, that we're able to put the right guidelines into place where they can't really go wrong, they can't really blow their budget, but they're able to skin and surface this place to be a really accurate reflection of them rather than them just buying something from us.
Yep. The next step after all of that is all this stuff needs to be coordinated. Like it's pretty easy to say, yeah, I want this to be black, I want this to be this color, and to put it up in a model. But remember the second image I shared at the very start of the presentation, there's a lot of impacts from making a certain tile choice. That tile has a certain width to it. It has a certain way it needs to be applied to a wall or to a floor in different ways to make sure that it lasts over time and it's installed correctly. So, we go through a very heavy sort of vetting effort with any items, any fixtures, any finishes that are in Hut's projects and that are a part of our standards. And we apply the same thing for any new things that we're using in a project that a client may be bringing in, just to make sure that everything is fully communicated to our build partners and that like the aesthetic vision is achieved. And you're not being peppered with hundreds of questions from the contractor about, okay, how exactly does this tile need to be laid out? Or we're not being peppered with hundreds of questions by that, but all that stuff is really well coordinated from the beginning. Same thing with sort of custom millwork or custom cabinetry that needs to happen. Dimensions are super specific. There's a lot of coordination that takes place between the contractor, between the mill worker, between us to make sure those items fit really well and are executed at a high level. And so we go through all the detailed documentation that's needed to communicate these efforts to the people who are actually going to be constructing it and installing it in the field to make sure everyone knows what these things are, how they need to be executed, and that there aren't any issues. Not just to say like Hut's is the expert, like we're telling everyone how these things need to be. It is a collaborative process where we're taking input from the cabinet maker, we're taking input from the builder, that if they see an issue with a certain thing that we're showing, we address that issue early in the process and get to sort of a shared solution before wood is flying and grout is flying and tiles being shipped to the site, that we're out ahead of anything that may be coming up. All of this then comes together to your project dashboard where we're listing all the specific items that are in your project. So you can, follow the links to what those objects are, transparency around the pricing to these items. The contractor can look at these items and see if there's any specifics for how they need to be, of how like this particular doorknob needs to be installed in a door. How much extra wood flooring do we need to order to make sure we have, because there's going to be cutting of the flooring happening on the site. How do we make sure we're ordering enough for the project? This is sort of an example of how we're tracking all of those things to procure them on your behalf, utilize our trade discounts and get them shipped to site within the construction schedule to make sure nothing is holding up the contractor. And then this is just like a little bit of an example of a purchase order that we generate after this, so we are, finalizing all the items. We're sending those to our product reps. They're sending us back order sheets. We're checking that everything is correct, and having you sign off of those on the at the very end of that. Hopefully, we have happy clients at the end.
Yeah, just to go back to those documents and here too, I just want to make the point that there's a big gap between visualizing a space with some cool materials and actually making the space look like that and getting all of those materials on site. Because remember, it's made up of hundreds of things. There are hundreds of decisions, hundreds of objects getting shipped from all over the place. How do they get on site? Typically, oftentimes that's the domain of the contractor. We kind of take on the procurement because we're quite streamlined in how this works. Sometimes it's the domain of a client to get all those things to site to a T. Anyone I've talked to who's gone through that process says they will never, ever do that again. And so we're kind of getting to that visualization where we can agree, yeah, here's all the things. We're getting that pricing where we can say this makes sense within the financial context of the project, but then really getting to that next piece of how do we streamline the ordering, procurement, and delivery of things to site so that you don't end up with the condition like Joe was hinting to of, great, we've got got the toilet here and we have the sink here, but the bathroom tile is not down on the floor, so we can't install those yet. And then it's like, oh, nobody ever selected bathroom tile. The tile I did want has a 4-month lead time. I guess we're just waiting until then. And so these are the things that during construction frustrate people to no end, where they still have the design idea of what it is, but the operations of how to get it done aren't in place. And so this is the second half of what's so important in making this place your own, is not just putting an image that represents your ambitions, but making sure we're putting the process in place to actually deliver on it.
Yep.
Let's open it up to Q&A for a bit. Just a wrap up before we start. The goal here was to show how we started from our standard, how we started through an initial selections process using our streamlined interiors, finishes, and fixtures approach, how that got started manipulated through the unique design input and needs of our clients, and then how did we incorporate those unique design inputs so we can make it their house, that it's their spot, not ours applied to them, and then how are we helping them now actually execute on that. And so if you have any questions about those ideas, those would be sort of germane. If you have other ones, also happy to field them, but please use the Q&A dialogue here at the bottom, and Joe and I will try and field any questions you have as best we can. I know we have some that already funneled in, and let's see. Agnes asks, can you do a mix of light and dark design elements? Of course, happens all the time. Often someone will say, hey, I really like for my primary suite, I really want sort of like a moodier space with a moodier bathroom, and then everywhere else I want to lighten it up. Makes total sense. And even room by room, you'll have that full inventory of everything that makes up. Really, the way to think of it is we've got every object that we have in our starting catalog fits into one of 6 categories. It's either light and dark, and it's either value, standard, or upgrade. And so do you want here a faucet that is standard and within our dark palette? Okay, great. But you want to pair it with something that's sort of a value cabinet in our sort of like lighter finish. Totally fine. We just find it tends to get us closer to the answers faster by saying, where are you kind of on this gradient between, is it more of a light and airy space? Is it more of a dark and rich space? And we can answer a lot of the questions and come up with our initial inventory a lot faster. Jet, good.
Yeah, so I could take the next 2 here.
Yeah, sure. Good.
Just working down. Lisa, when talking about like the pricing sheet, does conditioned home mean the shell in general? The answer to that is yes. You know, like anything from foundations, all the framing, all the siding, all the roofing, windows and doors, insulation, electrical, plumbing, mechanical. That's what we mean by conditioned home. The other 2 categories when we're thinking about pricing is groundwork improvement. So like if you're on a rural lot, septic, well, driveway, electric, running from the road, and then fixtures and finishes, which are the items we talked about sort of today, like wood flooring, tile, plumbing fixtures, electrical fixtures, things like that. And then Caitlin, does estimated pricing and HUD's budgets include labor as well or materials alone? That's an excellent question. Our budget estimates only include the material cost of the things we will be procuring. But while we're sort of like finalizing those interiors budgets, what's happening simultaneously is we're also working with the contractor who's attached to the project on pricing estimates for the whole project. So we're also telling the contractor, hey, there's 300 square feet of tile in the master bathroom. Provide us with a labor number to install that while we're pulling together the material costs of that tile. And that creates some pretty cool synergies where it's like, okay, maybe we're spending too much on tile overall. Either we're selecting a less expensive tile, or maybe we're pulling back on the entire tile that's going in the project altogether, or even the opposite direction. Hey, we have like more money to spend. Let's put more tile in more places. And we know what the costs are from the material and the labor side sort of simultaneously. So all that stuff, it goes into the pricing conversation. So yeah, that's a really good question.
Perfect. Then Janice asks, are your homes appropriate for an in-town lot? Most seem to be in rural locations. Yeah, for sure. We have a number of projects that are more in sort of like town parcels hooked up to municipal infrastructure. I think that they make a lot of sense for those locations as well. One of the reasons we have a lot of clients that are in rural spots is not just from an aesthetic standpoint, but for process, that they maybe have this lot in a rural area and it's like, now what? What do I do with this place? And unless you have been a land developer in a rural location, you probably have very little input on how to get those land improvements done, how to onboard a contractor, how to even finance the project. And so it tends to be that a lot of our projects are in more rural settings because that's where it's kind of harder to design and develop a home project just because of limited resources. And a lot of our process is designed to solve for areas where there's very little to work with. And how do you take what is there and turn those ingredients into a really remarkable outcome? But Janice would love to talk to you about your in-town lot in whatever town that might be. Arthur asks, are the values you presented only for interior design? Not exactly sure what you mean there. There's kind of a couple pieces here though. If we say 20%, we're talking about the material and install cost for the finishes and fixtures. And what we mean by finishes and fixtures is anything that is affixed to the building. So tile goes on, cabinets go on, lighting goes on, doesn't include other things that might be part of like an interior designer or decorator's budget, like the rug or the furniture. That's for the most part up to our clients to execute on. Anonymous asks, will you do custom sourcing if you want something that's not in the catalogs? Absolutely. So that was a big part of what we were just showing in this presentation. Probably 40% of the things that we showed in those renderings, they were just ideas. Hey, I love angled black and white tile. Okay, well, we don't have any angled black and white tile in our catalog. Let's find one that works for the price. Let's find one that works for the install method. Let's find one that works for the location and the timing for delivery. And so that tends to drive some of our service fees up when we're finding custom things that aren't included, but we have a really good sense of where to look for these. And it's fun. We kind of figure out how to fold in these new objects and make them part of our standards. And while Anonymous, your first version of this may make you a little bit of a guinea pig, everyone else here will benefit from us having researched that object and seeing if we would recommend it going forward.
Yep. Got a good question here from Kate as well. A question around like seeing installers potentially increase labor cost if the client is procuring their own materials and not selecting it through them, or certain contractors not working with owner supplied materials. We really don't experience that for a couple of reasons. Like that certainly does happen. And from my experience, I've seen that happening sort of when someone is coming to a contractor or an installer and working with them to try to find it. Like sometimes contractors don't like someone just throwing random objects at them and saying, hey, put this in my spot, because there's a lot of things that are impacted by a kitchen faucet. Like, is it one hole or is it 3 holes? How many holes need to be in the counter to account for that? What does my plumber need to do to install these items? There's potentially a lot of coordination time associated with every single object that's going into your project if the contractor is sort of handling that directly with the owner. A lot of communication needs to happen back and forth. But through our process, we supply our contractors with fully coordinated drawings. So we approve the items with you. We make sure that's reflected in our drawings. And the contractor has a set of drawings telling them exactly what they need to be doing, often with exact specification sheets from the manufacturer on that object. So everything is known about it. And contractors really like that. They like knowing exactly what needs to happen. That eliminates a lot of coordination time, which in effect lowers cost overall because things are vetted and fully communicated to contractors through our process. Hope that answers questions.
Yeah, I think that's great. Let's see. Amy asks, have you ever encountered a design aesthetic that didn't work with the HUD standard? Yeah, Sure. I mean, there's as much as we're a system and a process, we also have a design team that has a perspective on what good is. And we think a lot about context, what makes sense in certain areas. And we're often quick to evaluate if somebody says, hey, I really want to do this thing, either determine whether we're kind of the right fit for that approach or materially if is even part of the standard anymore, right? Like the standard is not just about design, it's also about construction methodology. And so if you're coming with an idea with a very different construction methodology, it may just not be a fit. That you might want it to look kind of like our homes, but the way that it gets built, the way that it gets done is sort of totally different. And we might recommend, hey, think about this prefab partner or think about this other way to go about it. Agnes asks, can Huts build garages, or is that more of a separate project that would require an outside contractor? Well, we design and help develop garages all the time and outbuildings and all kinds of structures. So absolutely. And particularly like working on garages that are sort of multifunctional, where it's the garage, it's the workshop, it could be like an ADU unit down the line and has these different elements to it. So Agnes, if you have a garage project in mind, would love to talk about it. Some of these I'm going to respond by sending you to the YouTube channel for HUDs, where we have actually filmed and recorded similar webinars that answer these exact questions. So Caitlin asks, any tips for getting started with the HUD's process, and do we need a contractor secured? Almost to a T, nobody that we work with has a contractor secured, and we're there to help assemble the build team. And so we have a webinar that's specifically under how we do it, putting together the build team. And so we'll put the link to if you're watching this later, you're already on our YouTube channel, but head to YouTube, search for Huts NYC, and you'll see all of our how we do it webinars, and that's a specific topic. I'd say the same with Declan. Just our last webinar last week was for this topic. What is owner's representation for us? What exactly goes into it? The short answer is we really right size our involvement on owner's representation based on the client's desire for involvement and where they'll be on some of it, and also the format of the contractor's team. Contractor means a lot of things in different areas. Sometimes a contractor is a larger home builder operation and they have back of house, they've got estimators, they've got project management, they've got foremen. And we don't want to kind of double work how much we're doing and how much they're doing. And so then in those cases, we're really there for design quality control. Alternatively, contractor can also be a guy. And in a lot of rural areas, that's what it is. So it's the guy running the company is also the guy swinging hammers and the guy subcontracting with everybody. And what you get from that is usually lower profit and overhead costs because there's less back of house, but harder to communicate, less sort of documentation of what's going on, a little bit harder to understand where you are on budget and timeline. And then we step in to fill that role. And so we have a little bit of we're kind of rounding out their services as the owner's rep and helping liaison between the client and the contractor. Lisa asks, what's the smallest lot you have worked on?
I think a third of an acre, maybe?
Maybe a third of an acre. And then there's some town parcels that we've been evaluating recently that are more like 10,000 square feet, like a very typical in-town lot. That's popping up more and more on ADU projects that we're working on or evaluating, particularly in where there's been statewide regulation around ADUs. I'm thinking about Vermont, for instance. I have a client that we're getting started with soon, and in Bennington, Vermont, all kind of small little town lots off of Main Street, but we're figuring out how do we fit an ADU into that small space. And I'll kind of pick up on this last one because Matt, it's the same. I send you to the same spot over to YouTube, where we have how we do it, land sourcing and land evaluation. So one of the things that you're thinking about is, hey, I have this lot, I'm sort of interested in it. How do I know it's not a dump? And we care a lot about that deeply and have a process of evaluation. Parcels kind of give you a thumbs up and thumbs down whether you should move forward on it. That's both for your benefit, but assuming we work together on designing and developing the house, it's also for our benefit. And selfishly, we don't want to be working on something that's going to be a headache for forever, or we're working uphill against the natural conditions of the parcel, and because there's never right for building to begin with, or we're working uphill against the zoning or land use because you have the ambition to have a short-term rental or you want to subdivide and there's no way you're ever going to get that done on your parcel. And so if we can know your ambitions up front for the lot and then evaluate your parcel through that lens. We like to be able to do it. And the last thing you're asking here is, how do I know if there's well or septic can be done? One of the things we're going to advise you is that's going to be part of your due diligence period, that if you choose to move forward with this lot, you want to add a contingency in buying that lot that says, I will close on this parcel if and only if the percolation test reveals that I can build a septic for the size house that I want, and that a well is viable and not poisoned in this area. And that's going to be a relatively inexpensive upfront cost for you to lay out to make sure that you end up with a land parcel that satisfies your needs going forward. Okay, we got down to the bottom. The last note we have here is from Amy, who says, great exclamation point, which is usually a good spot to end, but let me open it up for any other Q&A, any other questions you might have before we break. And like always, all of these webinars will live on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/HutsNYC. And you'll see all of our webinars for how we do it, for development opportunities, and any other thing that we kind of choose to film. And we're excited to hear from everyone out there that has projects in mind, and continue to field your questions. Thank you so much, Joe. Katie, in lieu of your technical problems, thank you so much for this excellent project with Brett and Danielle. And everyone out there, thanks for attending and taking some time in the middle of the day to join.
Thanks, Wayne. Thanks all for joining.
See you guys.